Hey guys, I'm here today to do another chatty video, and this is sort of in response to the video I did last week talking about whether I was falling out of love with reading, and also in response to a few videos I've seen talking about similar topics in the last week or so. So I apologise that the lighting isn't great, I just really wanted to film this, and it is a sort of cosy Sunday evening, so I have the big lights, as my mum would call them, on, so it's a bit yellow in tone, so apologies for that. So there's a few things I wanted to try and talk about in this video, and I haven't planned this at all. I never plan my videos, hence why sometimes these sort of videos are a little bit rambly, but I think you guys don't mind that too much, hopefully. So the first thing I wanted to address, the most important thing I want to say, is that I'm so grateful for the massive response on the video I did last week. It was phenomenal, and I guess not unexpected, because I should come to know that that's the way the booktube community reacts to videos of that nature. They're just really supportive and great at giving advice at the same time as being really comforting and just so friendly. But it is overwhelming when there's that much of a response. I think the video has over 250 comments, and the majority of those comments are they're such large comments. There's been so much effort put into them, whether they're advice or whether they're people recommending certain books that I have on my unread shelf that they think would help me out. And there's people like relating to me and saying, you know, I felt like this, so you're not alone, or just people saying, you know, don't worry about it and try and relax. The comments have been amazing, and after filming the video I felt better for having sort of spoken about it even before I'd uploaded it, but then within 24 hours of uploading, the massive response was just amazing, completely amazing. And I think a combination of just the warmth of the responses was lovely, but as well as the advice just made me feel like it was all so much more, I guess, approachable. So, you know, the first thing I want to say is I haven't got to everyone's comments yet. I do plan to. I haven't just yet. But if I haven't yet, then I am so grateful for your comments and your feedback and your thoughts and your concerns and all those sorts of things. And I just wanted to, you know, say thank you to the community as a whole, because I think it really shows the sort of place we are. So that was a lovely thing to sort of already know but have sort of reaffirmed. So there is that. And then I think the other thing that I didn't mention in my previous video, and I sort of thought about mentioning it but didn't, and there's always a fine line for me between things that I discuss on the channel where it's too much to share. And what I mean by that is I watch other people's channels, and when they share stuff that's going on in their personal life, whether it's happy or sad, I'm always fine to watch that, and I never think, oh, you know, you shouldn't talk about that in your videos at all. But for some reason, I think if I'm still in the moment of a feeling, I don't perhaps feel ready to talk about it. And I know that my video was fairly negative, and the reaction to that has been great. However, I think it is worth saying that I think a big part of the reason I feel how I do is that I haven't had a brilliant year, and it's not been like there's been nothing really bad happen this year. You know, when you just have some of those years where you feel a bit stuck, I feel a bit low, I feel quite stressed and anxious, and I think because of that, that's been feeding into every part of my life, and a big part of my life is reading. And sadly, I guess throughout the year, but particularly in the last couple of months, I felt like a lot of joy has been sapped out of the things I normally love, and that has sadly sort of manifested itself in my reading. So I do certainly think, you know, I'm more critical and I've read some rubbish books, but I did want to highlight that, you know, I don't want it to sound completely doom and gloom, like, oh, it's all the books and it's the sort of reader I am. I do think I'm just having a bad year, and I didn't want to go into great detail about that because, you know, there's things I just find uncomfortable or awkward talking about to a camera, effectively. But I don't want it to come across, I think it possibly came across in the video that it's completely all on the books, and I don't think it all is. I think a lot of it is, at the moment particularly with me not really reading, is just how I feel. And I think naturally as I start to feel better about things, which I feel like I am a bit, then I will naturally feel better about other things such as reading as well. So I just wanted to sort of mention that. So the sort of, I think I had three main or I don't know if there's 3. I'm really rubbish at sort of thinking these videos through. So let's try and think of the order to do this in. Firstly, I'm going to talk about the comments. Now, in terms of the comments, there was three different types of advice I was given. Sometimes all 3 by one comment, and sometimes, you know, one person would give one piece of advice, someone else would give another. But there was definitely a theme in the comments that I noticed. So number 1 was the people saying, pick up favourite books and reread favourites. You know you love them, and you know you're going to find comfort in them, and there's going to be no sort of stresses attached to them. So just reread favourites. Completely agree. I think that's a great idea. I've since picked up a favourite book and I'm rereading that. I'm not going to talk about what I'm reading at the moment because I'm, as I'll discuss later, I'm trying to sort of keep my reading very low stress, and a way of doing that is to not make it as public as I usually do, which I will talk about a little bit later in the video. So one of those, you know, one of the big things, takeaways, was to pick up favourite books, which I think is a great idea. Another one was people who had gone through my Goodreads shelves and were saying, these books sound amazing, give these books a go. I wanted to highlight the 3 books that came up the most, and I've stupidly forgot to get them off my shelves for you, but I'll just put the covers up here somewhere. So probably the most mentioned book off my bookshelf was The Vegetarian by Han Kang, which isn't surprising. People have been raving about it since it came out a couple of years ago, and I have had it for a while and haven't read it. I have read Human Acts by Han Kang and really enjoyed it, so I will get to The Vegetarian. It was great to hear people sort of reaffirm their love for it, so that was one of the books out of the 260-ish unread books I owned that was mentioned the most. The second was Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston, which isn't really a surprise. I've heard so many people say this is one of the best books they've ever read and one of the best works of African American or just American literature in general, and it's a book I do, you know, really mean to get to, and I keep my classic editions separate from my main bookshelf, and so sadly sometimes they get ignored because I'll walk over to these shelves and have a browse, and they're somewhere else in the room, and I don't tend to look at those shelves as much, so I certainly want to try and you know, get used to considering those books more. And then the third was that people noticed I had Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin on my shelf, and loads of people just said, in general, if you have a James Baldwin on your shelf, pick it up because he's amazing. So those were the 3 that people mentioned the most, and you know, the ones that I now have as the sort of strong contenders on my bookshelf to pick up. And then the other piece of advice was just to stop reading, to not read. If I don't feel like reading, to not force myself, and to do whatever else I feel like doing, whether that's watching TV or I don't know, playing silly games on my phone or whatever that may be. And bizarrely, I've sort of taken all 3 of those things on board, because particularly the last week since I've done the video, I do now feel like reading, but I keep feeling like reading, and then I'll pick up a book and read 1 chapter and then sort of not be used to the idea of carrying on, and so I put it down, and I'm trying to just be okay with that and let it be really natural. So yeah, I have picked up a favourite. I have picked up a book or so off my shelf that I just think are going to be really great books for me, and I pick them purely on whim because that's something I want to try and do more. And I'm also just not reading, so I'm reading a lot less than I usually do, you know. I might be reading 15 pages a day, some days not reading at all. So yeah, that's that. So I've sort of taken all 3 bits of advice on board, and yeah, I just want to try and be just a lot more relaxed about it, and sort of refresh myself and see how I feel in the new year. I know the new year seems like a really arbitrary thing, but it feels like a nice refresher for me. So I'm just going to sort of let the next sort of 5 or 6 weeks go as they will, and then see how I feel in the new year. Okay, so now I want to talk about, I guess, the further thoughts I've had since filming that video. Some of those thoughts come from things you guys said in the comments, and some of those thoughts come from videos, video responses or other videos around the same topic that I have since seen. So firstly, I think in the video I sort of referenced to the Goodreads rating system a fair amount. and I saw Steve Donahue. He's since done a few different videos on the topic, but the first video I saw him do, I'll link all these videos I mentioned down below, as well as others that I've seen that I may not mention by name, and I'd recommend checking them all out. So Steve mentioned that he was concerned that I was putting it across that I was saying the issue was me reading critically. That isn't what I meant at all. I don't think I could not read critically now, and I like reading critically. It was more just a comment from me that I felt that was lessening my enjoyment overall, but I wouldn't swap I wouldn't take away being critical to have more enjoyment. That is who I am by nature. I'm going to carry on being critical, and you know, the more I read, I will get more critical. I saw Jennifer do a video for her channel's called Insert Literary Pun Here, and she described that perfectly. So if you want to hear someone talk much more eloquently than I can on why by reading more you become more of a critical reader, then definitely check that video out. So Steve was saying, in defence of critical reading, he felt that maybe the issue was more Goodreads and the rating system, and I guess sort of the arbitrary nature of putting a number on your reading and the stresses that causes. And I agree to an extent. However, I view it slightly differently to how Steve does. So since seeing Steve's video, I've also seen Camille from What Camille Reads do a video about sort of in defence, I guess, of the Goodreads rating system, and I have really conflicting views about the star rating system on Goodreads. Let me try and explain them. When I first started my channel around 5 years ago, BookTube was very structured. Nearly everyone did TBRs, nearly everyone did monthly wrap-ups, nearly everyone did monthly book hauls, and everybody used star ratings. I mean, not categorically everybody, but the majority of people use star ratings. And I'd started using Goodreads about a year before my channel. It had become just a nice way for me to document my reading, and that's the only real way I viewed it. I didn't really think much about the star rating. You know, I just go with the feeling when I finished a book, and it wasn't something I really dwelled on that much, or dwelt on. Not sure there. Anyway, so I recognise that over the years of having my channel, I've become more conscious of the Goodreads rating system. Now, this is where I would, I guess, disagree with Steve, because I don't think that's because of Goodreads. I think that's because of BookTube, and I think that's because of me, and that's because of how I feel about my channel and how I feel about making my reading so public. So I don't think there's anything wrong with the Goodreads rating system. I think it's a difficult thing to measure, because when you hear people in their videos say a book was 3 or 4 stars, or when you see people on Goodreads mark a book as 3 or 4 stars, that means something so different to each person. So unless you know that person's personal rating system, it's really difficult to know what it means to them. However, I do think it's a nice tool. You know, for example, I'll sometimes click on a book that I own I haven't read yet, and I'll go to my Goodreads friends and see if there's people who I know who I'm quite confident as to what their star rating system is, to see what they've given it, and I'll get excited if someone who has similar reading taste to me is giving that a high star rating. So I find star ratings are great for, I guess, sort of broad scanning. They're an easy thing to check. I think Goodreads ratings are great for things like if you're doing an end of the year wrap up and you want to just go to people, oh, you know, my reading year in general felt like this, I had this many 5s, this many, then I think it's a really easy sort of touch base way of discussing your reading. It lacks depth certainly, but I think for those broader scale discussions it is useful, and for me, I like the fact that I can go back to my Goodreads shelf and have sort of 6 years of my reading on there, and I can sort by star rating and you know, instantly see all the books I've loved the most over the last 6 years. My opinions may have since changed, and usually I'll change my star ratings to reflect that even years on, but I like it for the ease, I guess. So that's why I like the star rating on Goodreads. However, as a viewer, I don't find it particularly helpful. So what I mean by that is, if somebody does a review or a wrap up and they talk for about 4 minutes about a book, then I don't really feel that knowing the star rating is necessary, because they've probably spoken in depth enough about the book and well enough about the book that they've expressed their opinions clearly enough that then giving the additional star rating to me is sort of pointless. It doesn't bother me, but after I've listened to someone speak about a book for a certain length of time, it becomes unnecessary for me. So I have naturally continued to mention my star ratings in videos just because it's something I've always done. I've been thinking about it a lot the last year as to whether I want to stop doing that. And I'm sort of in between. I feel like it's unnecessary. As I said, if I speak about the book in depth, you should be able to, I should put my thoughts across clearly enough that you don't need me to mention the star rating. But equally, if I'm sort of uninterested in discussing a book because I haven't got a ton to say, and I just go, do you know what, this was around 3 stars, you know, I quite enjoyed it, I had some issues with it, and then I just don't want to talk about it anymore and I move on. It's just an easy way to express to you guys what that book meant to me in terms of enjoyment. So I think I'll start mentioning it less, but I may still use it when I just want to talk broad scale about books, if I don't want to talk about the book much, or if I want to do sort of end of the year overviews. I think star ratings are helpful in that nature. So I think the issue of star rating more, as I said, is because of BookTube. Now, I don't want to sound negative about BookTube at all because I love it, and I've never considered stopping my channel. That's never something I've considered. You know, I don't know what the future will bring, but as of now, I love having a channel, I love making videos, and I love watching videos and chatting to you guys, so that isn't a concern for me at all. The issue I have more is taking a step back recently, and you know, part of this has been because of how I've been feeling about my life. I've probably been overanalyzing everything and being a bit anxious about everything, but it certainly made me realise that having the channel has dramatically changed my reading. And I saw Alina from Tall Tales do a really interesting couple of videos on this. One is about reader fatigue, and one she did a couple of weeks prior is about sort of reducing reading stress. And I'm not going to repeat all those things because I think she put it perfectly, but she highlights loads of things that cause stress in a sort of, she calls it a capital R reader, someone who's so publicly a reader. And she gives, you know, she sort of names the stresses and then gives ways of trying to lessen the stress. I think it's an excellent video, and every single point she mentioned I was like, yes, exactly. So I'll link that below and it's definitely worth checking out. So to put it briefly, for me there's so many stress things. I stopped doing monthly TBRs because I started to find them stressful, but then I'll still do seasonal TBRs, or sometimes I'll do TBRs for readathons. I'll do the 5-star prediction TBR video that I've done a couple of times this year. I'll haul books. And then even, that's just the stuff I mentioned to you guys and talk openly about, but then even in my own brain space or living space, I will sometimes stack books that I'm thinking of reading soon, and I'll move them to a different shelf and I'll look at those as my next read books. And what inevitably happens is you know, 2 weeks later my tastes have slightly changed, I feel like picking up something different, but I bully myself into reading the books that I previously chose off the stack. So I cannot remember the last time I chose a book on whim without feeling guilty about the fact that I'd already told myself I was going to read another book. I think it's been years. And that's a ridiculous thing. When I actually take a step back from that and think that before the channel, I would be reading a book and I probably wouldn't consider what I was going to read next until I'd finished it. And then maybe I wouldn't even think you've got to pick something now. Whereas I'm so used to being a reader now on BookTube that I will always consider what I'm going to read next, probably the next 5 or 10 books, and I'll always feel like I immediately have to choose. If I go to bed and I finish a book right before bed, sometimes I find it difficult to go to sleep because I'm stressing about choosing the next book, and it starts to, I guess it's, and this is all me, right? I'm sure loads of people have BookTube channels and don't feel like this, but I think I've had the channel for so long, and this all started off as fun list making and you know, ticking things off a checklist, and I've allowed it to snowball so much over the years. Actually, it's become oppressive and sort of anxiety inducing. So for me, I don't think it is so much the Goodreads rating. I think for me it's the pressures I put on myself because of the channel. I mean, I don't think it's viewers that put that pressure on at all, because I know as a viewer, I'd be interested to hear what you guys think of this, but I know if somebody does a TBR video for the month or for the season, unless they mention, like, maybe if they mention one of my favourite books and then they do their wrap at the end of the month, I may remember, oh, they didn't manage to read that favourite book and I was intrigued to hear what they thought about that one. But that's rare. Normally, unless they say, oh, I didn't do very well on my TBR, I'll have already completely forgot what that TBR was. So that's why I always think to myself, why do you get so stressed? Because as a viewer and as a reader, you're so laid back about being a viewer, but then as a reader you're really sort of stressed about it and there's no need to be, because you know that as a viewer it isn't like that. So I think my plan is to try and completely strip back all these things that I've accumulated over the past 5 years of being the thing to do because I have the channel. And it isn't all because of the channel. A lot of it is just because of the sort of reader I've become. And so I want to strip all that back. One thing that loads of people mentioned in the comments was maybe it's that I'm reading too much of the same thing. Loads of people pointed out that I read an awful lot of new releases. I know that, I've mentioned it quite a lot, to be honest, and I'm well aware of it. And it's because the new releases get so exciting and you're talking about them when other people are talking about them. But something even I've started to realise is, you know, perhaps that's why I'm not enjoying books so much. The lack of variety, reading lots of new releases. I used to read a lot of modern classics and classics. I don't at all anymore. So maybe it's the lack of variety. And also other people were saying, which I completely agree, you read newer releases, there's been less reviews and they've not really had to stand the test of time at all because they're brand new. If I'd have waited 5 years, then perhaps I'd have not been interested in some of those books because I'd have heard other people who I trust say actually they're not really worth it. And so I really want to go back to reading less new releases. I think at the end of the year I'll probably do sort of a broad scope video where I talk about a few statistics, and I'm willing to bet the majority of books I've read have been published in 2016 or 2017, which is bad. Up until the last 2 years my reading wasn't like that. It was way more varied. Yeah, like I bet I barely read any books that are like pre 2010, which is ridiculous. Like reading an old book now would feel to me like reading a book from the early 2000s, which is obviously like a joke. So yeah, there's lots of things I want to try and change. And so what I've realised is, and you know, this is obviously something that I was already sort of aware of, but having put it all in perspective, is all this stuff is really silly. This is something I love, something I've always got a lot of enjoyment out of, and certainly that's limited at the moment because of just how I feel in general life, and you know, I hope and think that will get better very soon. But I think that I'm putting lots of petty stresses on things that don't need to be stressful. And it's because it's so tempting. I love making lists. I've always hated ticking things off lists and doing lists, but I love making them. And so it's very tempting to think, I'm going to start a bullet journal next year. I'm going to read these books before the end of the year. And even last night I started a short story collection, and there's 8 short stories in it. And I thought, if I read one a night, will I finish it by the end of November? And then I was like, oh no, I'll be 3 stories short. So that means that for 3 nights I'll have to read 2 stories. And then I was like, why? It doesn't matter. Don't read it by the end of November. It can run on to the next month. Nobody cares. Nobody, absolutely nobody cares if you don't finish it by the end of the month. It's ridiculous. And so I have all these ingrained silly little rules and regulations that are ridiculous and nobody cares about them. That I make them so overblown. And I think, you know, certainly there's been rubbish books this year. Certainly it hasn't been a great year for me in general in terms of my mood. But I think an awful lot of it is that those things combined, and the way I'm so heavy on the rules and regulations in my reading, which is a joke because I'm not in any other factor of my life, have all come together to just make it not so fun anymore. So there may be some changes on my channel because of this, because I'm trying to be way less stressy. I'd be really interested to know anything you think in response to all the thoughts I've just blathered out. But particularly I'd be interested to know whether as a viewer you find star ratings useful, and in what context do you find them useful. I'd also be interested in hearing how you guys feel about wrap-ups. I watch various channels. Some channels do them every month, some channels do them weekly, fortnightly, some channels do them when they read 5 books, they do a wrap up. What do you guys enjoy? I think it's become the norm to do it a certain way, but I'd be more intrigued to hear what people prefer. Do let me know your thoughts. I'll link all the videos down below, they're really worth checking out. I've really enjoyed hearing what everyone else has to say, and I will see you in the next video. I have no idea when that will be. I don't think, well, I'm not going to do a November wrap up. I really don't feel like it right now. I may just do an end of the year if I manage to read much, but you know, we'll see. There will be videos obviously before the new year, but at the moment I don't know what they'll be. So thank you ever so much for watching. Thank you again to anyone who watched my previous video and commented on it. As I said, I am still getting back to those comments, but I greatly appreciate everyone's thoughts and recommendations and just general warmth and friendliness. So thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Bye!